At dawn, a heavy lorry rolls off a cross-channel ferry onto English soil. It's a quiet arrival at a port of England, one of hundreds of trucks coming in that morning, but this particular vehicle carries a deadly secret. Hidden among crates of innocent-looking fruit juice packets are kilos upon kilos of cocaine, pressed into blocks and wrapped to avoid detection. For months, shipments like this have slipped through undetected, feeding an insatiable drug market. But today, armed officers and customs agents are waiting. As they pry open the cargo, bale after bale of high-grade cocaine emerges. The bust is huge, and it's just one piece of a far larger puzzle. The drugs in this truck trace back to a sprawling criminal alliance stretching from the ports of Belgium and the Netherlands to the streets of London, Manchester, and Liverpool. This is the work of the so-called Mocro Mafia, an underground empire that has quietly infiltrated England's underworld, bringing with it a new era of cartel-style crime. The Mocro Mafia, a name coined in the Netherlands, first rose to power on the continent, but its influence now reaches deep into the UK. Originating among Dutch Moroccan gangs in the 1990s, this network built its fortune smuggling cannabis and later cocaine into Europe. Over the years, they forged direct links with South American cartels, securing a pipeline of narcotics that pour into Europe's major harbors. In the Netherlands and Belgium, they became infamous, controlling a huge share of the cocaine trade, ruthlessly eliminating rivals and flaunting wealth with impunity. Their power was so extensive that Dutch police union officials warned the country was turning into a narco-state. Reporters and lawyers who got too close to their secrets were assassinated in broad daylight, sending shockwaves through Europe. This is the criminal powerhouse now extending tentacles into England, not through a single monolithic gang, but via a web of partnerships and supply routes that have quietly embedded themselves into British organised crime. England has become one of the Mocro Mafia's most prized markets. The UK is Europe's largest consumer of cocaine, and British gangs demand a steady supply. To meet that demand, the Mocro Mafia and their allies have developed sophisticated trafficking routes into England. Much of the product originates across the Atlantic. Multi-ton shipments of cocaine depart from Latin America, bound for Europe. Historically, many of these loads land at the port of Antwerp in Belgium or Rotterdam in the Netherlands, enormous container ports where the sheer volume of cargo provides cover for contraband. Some containers are intercepted by authorities, but many slip through. From these European gateways, the drugs are on the move to the UK. One common route is via North Sea ports. Bulk shipments are broken down and concealed in commercial cargo headed for Britain. Standard shipping containers, carrying everything from tropical fruits to car parts, may hide packages of cocaine within false panels or among legitimate goods. These containers arrive at major British ports like Felixstowe, London Gateway, Southampton or Liverpool, where corrupt insiders or unwitting hauliers help extract the illicit cargo. In other cases, traffickers use ferries and the Channel Tunnel to smuggle drugs overland. Trucks laden with drugs drive from the Netherlands or Belgium through France and board the Eurotunnel shuttles or cross by ferry into England. With thousands of lorries rumbling through the Channel Tunnel and on ferries every week, only a fraction gets searched thoroughly. The Mocro Mafia has exploited this, stuffing cocaine into cleverly engineered hiding places, secret compartments in truck chassis, pallets of produce, even inside boxes of children's juice drinks. In fact, one notorious operation uncovered in 2019 revealed the vast scale of these methods. British authorities, working on a tip, dismantled a syndicate that had imported over 50 tons of drugs from the Netherlands into the UK over an 18-month period, an almost industrial-scale smuggling scheme. The gang had posed as a legitimate trucking enterprise, using Dutch and British front companies to mask their activity. They would load lorries in Holland with cocaine, heroin, cannabis, even MDMA, hidden among loads of vegetables and juice cartons. Those trucks then smoothly entered England through ports and made their way to depots on British soil. For a time, it was the perfect cover. By the time police moved in, this network had flooded Britain with billions of pounds worth of narcotics. Raids across the country netted dozens of suspects from London, Manchester, Leeds and other cities, as well as simultaneous arrests in the Netherlands. Officers seized hundreds of kilos of drugs stashed in warehouses and caught visuals of how brazenly the contraband had been camouflaged among everyday goods. One image, burned in investigators' memories, showed pallets of children's juice pouches concealing nearly half a ton of cocaine. It was, at the time, the largest drug importation conspiracy ever prosecuted in the UK. The National Crime Agency, NCA, declared that this takedown dismantled a well-established drug supply route, directly linking Dutch traffickers to British street dealers. That case was not an isolated incident. It underscored a broader partnership between the Mocro Mafia and British organised crime groups. For all their power in smuggling, the Dutch networks needed local distributors to actually sell the drugs on UK streets. British gangs, in turn, craved a stable supply of high-purity cocaine to meet booming customer demand. And so a symbiotic relationship formed. In London, long-standing British crime families and gangs found new suppliers from continental Europe offering top-grade cocaine at competitive prices. By tapping into these networks, London kingpins could cut out some middlemen and increase their profits. But it also meant working with foreign partners who operated like cartels, complete with paramilitary enforcers and a readiness to do violence. In Liverpool and Manchester, a similar alignment took place. These two northwestern cities, traditional rivals in many arenas, have seen gangland cooperation flourish thanks to common supply lines. Liverpool, with its history as a port city, has several international smugglers in its underworld lore. The city's gangs were notorious even back in the 1980s and 90s for forging ties to Colombian cartels. With the rise of the Mocro Mafia influence, Merseyside gangs gained even more direct access to cocaine streams. Some Liverpool traffickers travelled to the Netherlands and Belgium to broker deals, ensuring that multi-kilo loads would be dispatched to the UK on a weekly basis. EncroChat messages later showed Liverpudlian crime bosses discussing shipments in cryptic terms, arranging payments and pickups with Dutch contacts from the perceived safety of encrypted phones. Manchester's gang scene too reaped the benefits. Intelligence indicates that high-level operators in Manchester have pooled resources with their Liverpool counterparts to bring in consignments of drugs. A pragmatic alliance that puts profit above old turf rivalries. By collaborating on importing large quantities, gangs from both cities could lower their costs and share distribution across the north of England. Police officers remark that today, the two cities might be football rivals, but their gangsters are working together every day. The Mocro Mafia connection is a key reason. It effectively united disparate UK groups under one sprawling transnational enterprise. Specific UK cases and arrests highlight how entrenched this collaboration has become. In May 2025, for example, a joint UK-Dutch police operation targeted an active cocaine pipeline. In early morning raids, armed units hit locations in Merseyside, simultaneously with Dutch tactical teams storming addresses in the Netherlands. 8 suspects were arrested in one concerted sweep. Among them, several men from Liverpool and 2 Britons found hiding on Dutch soil alongside their European associates. This coordinated strike, spanning jurisdictions, showed the reach of the investigation. From Merseyside safehouses, officers seized cash, encrypted phones and ledgers documenting illicit dealings. In Amsterdam and Rotterdam, Dutch police rounded up the other end of the network. Such an operation demonstrated both the international nature of the threat and the increasingly coordinated response by law enforcement. Another case, codenamed Operation Matrix, recently concluded after years of work by the Northwest Regional Organised Crime Unit. This investigation actually began with a low-level drug dealer arrest in a small English town, but painstakingly rolled up into a nationwide conspiracy, ultimately exposing 3 major UK-based gangs that were all sourcing cocaine from abroad. By 2024, as trials commenced, it became clear how the UK groups were connected to the Mocro Mafia's supply line. In one strand of Operation Matrix, a British woman in her 30s was identified as a critical go-between. She had been coordinating shipments from the continent, acting as the UK branch's logistics and finance manager. Under surveillance, she was seen driving off a ferry from Holland into the port of Harwich, an SUV loaded down with 33 kilograms of cocaine hidden in her vehicle. She delivered this haul to a safe house in the English Midlands, from which it was further distributed to dealers across the northwest. After some key arrests, the woman fled the country, a telltale move that she understood the net was closing in. But when she eventually returned from the Middle East, thinking it was safe, agents were waiting at Heathrow to take her down. Digital forensics on her devices uncovered a trove of evidence: encrypted chats with senior cartel figures, meticulous spreadsheets tallying hundreds of kilograms of drugs and millions in payments, and notes like, "Having a good month, done 95k in profit so far." By the end of Operation Matrix, 13 individuals had been convicted in the UK, collectively sentenced to over 140 years in prison. The investigation had dismantled multiple criminal cells, all of which tied back to a common supply chain funneling cocaine from the Netherlands into England. It was a major victory for British law enforcement, and it shed light on the unseen architects behind these groups. Perhaps the biggest breakthrough in revealing the Mocro Mafia's UK footprint came in 2020, with the sensational takedown of an encrypted communications network used by criminals worldwide. EncroChat, a secretive subscription-based service, had been providing gangsters with modified phones and supposedly untraceable messaging. Little did they know, European investigators had infiltrated the platform. The UK's part of this effort, Operation Venetic, was unprecedented in scale. Over the spring and summer of 2020, as EncroChat's secrets slowly came out, British police were able to listen in on live conversations between criminals who thought no one was watching. The result was the largest series of raids and arrests in UK organised crime history. In total, 746 suspects were arrested in the UK in that sweep, including kingpins who had eluded capture for years. Officers seized over 2 tons of drugs, along with 77 firearms and upwards of $54 million in cash. For the first time, authorities got an unfiltered look at how deeply international cartels had embedded themselves in Britain. They saw conversations where mid-level British dealers negotiated directly with overseas suppliers for multi-kilo quantities of cocaine or heroin. They saw photos of drugs and money being exchanged right there on the phones. And they saw the violent underbelly of these dealings, plans of what to do when things went wrong. The EncroChat intercepts foiled an estimated 200 gangland plots in the UK, including kidnappings and executions. In one case, messages revealed that a London gang member had been ordered to murder a rival, presumably over a turf or a deal dispute. The target was already marked. A hitman was preparing to carry it out. But with EncroChat intel in hand, police surveilled the suspect. When they moved in, they found him with a loaded pistol, the very weapon intended for the killing. The assassination was averted just in time. In another instance, an EncroChat thread detailed a plan to torture a debtor who owed a crime boss money. The kind of vicious example, more reminiscent of cartel tactics in Latin America than traditional British gangland. These chilling glimpses confirmed what many had feared. Cartel-style violence and methods were seeping into the UK's criminal landscape. Traditionally, even organised crime in Britain maintained a degree of restraint in its violence, at least compared to the open warfare seen in places like Mexico, or more recently, the Netherlands and Belgium. But the Mocro Mafia and similar networks operate under a different ethos, one that readily uses extreme violence as a tool of business. Now, that ethos is influencing British criminal groups who work with them. There have been instances of targeted shootings on UK soil connected to international drug feuds, and conspiracies to commit serious violence have spiked in recent years, according to the NCA. Law enforcement officials worry that the UK could see the kind of headline-grabbing brutality that has plagued the Netherlands, where crime reporters and innocent family members have been gunned down as collateral damage in gang wars. Already signs of this escalation are visible. British police have intercepted gang caches that included firearms, grenades, and even hit lists of enemies. Enforcers operating on UK turf have been caught with torture tools and weapons, suggesting they were ready to send bloody messages on behalf of bosses abroad. It's a level of savagery that shocks communities unaccustomed to such violence, and each incident underscores how the methods of the Mocro Mafia Intimidation, assassination, and terror have begun to take root here. But perhaps the most tragic consequence of the Mocro Mafia's expansion into England is its impact on the young and vulnerable. All the cocaine and heroin streaming into the country doesn't sell itself. It filters down to street-level networks, many of which rely on exploited individuals to do the riskiest work. In Britain, the past decade has seen the rise of what's known as county lines gangs. These are city-based drug crews that extend their operations into smaller towns, often sending young people to set up shop in distant counties where they're less likely to be known to police. The name comes from the dedicated phone lines they use to take orders from addicts in those areas. What's relevant is how these networks treat their recruits. As disposable pawns, many teenagers and even children have been groomed or coerced into running drugs along these county lines. They're lured with cash advances, gifts, or the false glamour of gang life. Then they're threatened with violence if they try to leave or if they fail to follow orders. Some kids are even physically transported to trap houses far from home, kept there to deal drugs, effectively cut off from any support and under gang watch. The Mocro Mafia's role in this is indirect but critical. By supercharging the supply of drugs, they've enabled the expansion of county lines operations everywhere. The National Crime Agency pointed out that massive imports by international cartels directly fuel the county lines trade, which in turn is linked to rising knife crime, kidnappings, and homicides in towns that previously had little experience of such things. British crime bosses armed with plentiful cocaine and heroin have aggressively pushed into new territories, and they enforce those new markets with terrifying brutality, often outsourcing the dirty work to children. It's not uncommon for a 15-year-old from London or Birmingham to be found by police in a seaside town, hundreds of miles from home, caught with a backpack full of Class A drugs. The child will usually be frightened, sometimes bruised or malnourished, and reluctant to speak, a typical victim of exploitation, fearing retribution from the gang if he talks. Even more disturbing, the Mocro Mafia and similar groups have been known to traffic vulnerable migrant children into Europe to use as drug runners. A recent investigation uncovered that hundreds of unaccompanied minors from North Africa, places like Morocco and Algeria, have been effectively enslaved by cocaine networks in Europe. These kids, often refugees or orphans who arrive in Europe alone, are preyed upon by criminal recruiters. They're promised food, shelter, maybe a bit of money, and then they are beaten, raped, or tortured if they disobey orders. In Belgium, police discovered that Moroccan boys as young as 12 were being deployed as street dealers in Brussels and Antwerp by the Mocro Mafia, forced to hit nightly quotas of sales under threat of horrific violence. Shockingly, a similar pattern has now been observed in the UK. In London, social workers and police recently sounded the alarm after several North African teenagers turned up with ghastly injuries, broken bones, knife wounds, severe burns. These children bore the marks of systematic torture. Investigators believe they had been sent to Britain as part of an international drug ring and punished for not selling enough cocaine or for some perceived disloyalty. The scenes are more like something out of a war zone than the capital of England. Frightened foreign kids with untreated wounds, too terrified to seek help because they know brutal enforcers are lurking, ready to make an example of them. This exploitation, both of local British youth and trafficked children from abroad, lays bare the true human cost of the Mocro Mafia's empire. It's not just about drugs and money, or even gangsters versus police. It's about vulnerable lives being chewed up in the cogs of a gigantic criminal machine. The Mocro Mafia and their partners see these youngsters as expendable foot soldiers on the front lines of their drug war. And for too long, many have indeed been sacrificed. Faced with these sobering realities, British law enforcement has been mounting a vigorous response. The NCA and regional police forces have learned that no agency can tackle this alone. The adversary is simply too international, too tech-savvy, and too rich. So the strategy has become one of collaboration and innovation. Internationally, the UK now coordinates closely with law enforcement in the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Spain, and beyond. British officials have stationed liaison officers on the continent to ensure intelligence flows quickly. When Dutch police pick up chatter about a cocaine shipment destined for England, they relay it to the NCA in real time. Joint task forces have been established, wherein British and Dutch officers literally work side by side on the same cases, sharing resources and strategies. There have been bilateral summits bringing together the NCA, Dutch National Police, Belgian Federal Police, and Europol analysts to map out the key players and routes. The result is more operations like the Merseyside Netherlands raids, multi-country strikes that hit the entire network from top to bottom, rather than just arresting some low-level couriers while kingpins remain safe abroad. A few years ago, such seamless cooperation might have been bogged down by bureaucracy, but in the face of extreme cartel violence, these agencies have cut through red tape. They realize that a drug lord in Amsterdam ordering hits and shipments can wreak havoc in England, and therefore stopping him is very much England's business too. On the technology front, the EncroChat hack proved how effective modern policing can be when it embraces cyber tactics. After that success, the NCA and other forces haven't sat still. They are investing heavily in cyber units to target the next encrypted platforms that criminals might use, such as Sky ECC, which was another network taken down, and any new variants on the horizon. Every time the gangs evolve their communication methods, the police are racing to catch up or even jump ahead. The goal is to prevent these criminal groups from ever feeling secure in their digital hideouts again. It's a high-stakes cat-and-mouse game. For now, the EncroChat operation dealt an immense blow, but everyone knows that new secret chat systems will pop up and the battle will continue in the shadows of cyberspace. On the streets of Britain, a multi-pronged push is underway to dismantle local networks linked to the Mocro Mafia. Special police units target the county lines gangs with raids and surveillance, arresting not just the street dealers, but importantly, the coordinators at the center, the ones texting out the orders and controlling the phone lines. When those individuals are caught, prosecutors now use modern slavery laws to make clear that exploiting children as drug runners is a heinous crime carrying severe penalties. In the past couple of years, hundreds of vulnerable youths have been removed from county lines operations and referred to support services instead of being treated as criminals. The hope is to break the cycle that keeps providing fresh recruits to the drug trade. At the border too, there's a stronger stance. British customs and border forces, often working with French, Dutch and Belgian counterparts, have stepped up checks on high-risk routes. State-of-the-art scanners and sniffer dogs are being deployed to examine cargo coming through ports and the Channel Tunnel. Although it's impossible to search every vehicle, agencies are using better intelligence to target specific shipments more likely to be carrying drugs. For example, random spot checks informed by data on suspicious shipping companies or unusual routing of goods. In one recent operation off the coast, the NCA even intercepted a small boat that had met a larger ship at sea to collect a consignment of cocaine and was trying to spirit it ashore in England under cover of darkness. That kind of maritime smuggling is another method these gangs use to bypass port security entirely, and British authorities are now watching the coastlines with heightened vigilance. Beyond direct enforcement, there's an effort to hit these syndicates where it truly hurts: their money. The Mocro Mafia generates astounding profits, the kind that can bribe officials, hire lawyers, and buy loyalty. So the NCA's financial investigators are tracing money flows and using powerful laws to seize assets. In the UK, mansions, luxury cars, and bank accounts linked to suspected drug bosses have been frozen or confiscated. One major case saw over $5 million in dirty cash found hidden in a London flat, the largest cash seizure in UK history, which investigators linked to an international drug ring. By taking away the luxury watches, the stacks of cash, the properties, enforcement not only punishes crime, but also undercuts the glamour that might attract the next generation of gang members. There's nothing enviable about a drug lord in jail watching his Ferrari get auctioned off by the state. All of these efforts, the raids, the wiretaps, the international manhunts, the rescues of children, form part of a broad campaign to stem the Mocro Mafia's influence in England. Progress has been made, key figures have been jailed on both sides of the North Sea, supply routes have been disrupted, at least temporarily, and communities that were suffering under the weight of drugs and violence have seen some relief as police crack down. Yet despite these victories, nobody is declaring success just yet. The Mocro Mafia is resilient and highly adaptable. When one leader falls, another often steps in. When one route is closed, the traffickers find a new port or a new method. The truth is that as long as demand for cocaine and other drugs stays sky high in the UK, there will be enormous incentives for criminal entrepreneurs to keep trying. The story is far from over. In the shadows, even now, British investigators suspect that tons of cocaine are still getting through. Maybe it's coming in smaller loads scattered across different entry points to avoid one big seizure. Maybe new players, Albanians, Turks or others, are collaborating with the Mocro networks, diversifying the risk. The underworld is constantly shifting, and while the Mocro Mafia's presence in England has been curbed, it has not been eliminated. What's certain is that the stakes are incredibly high. This isn't just a fight about drugs, it's about preventing a slide into the kind of lawlessness and bloodshed that international cartels bring. It's about stopping assassinations on British streets, keeping journalists and public figures safe from intimidation, and shielding children from being sucked into crime and violence. The British authorities know the enemy they face is formidable, a multinational, well-financed and utterly ruthless mafia that has already destabilized communities abroad. So the battle continues. In office blocks at London's Vauxhall, at the NCA headquarters, analysts pore over intelligence linking UK gangsters to Dutch phone numbers and Colombian supply chains. On the docks of Rotterdam and Antwerp, undercover agents try to spot the next container that might be destined for England with illicit cargo. In the suburbs of Liverpool and Manchester, surveillance teams track known traffickers, hoping to catch them meeting a courier or making a slip. And late at night in quiet English neighbourhoods, armed police units gear up, preparing to smash through doors. This is the new reality of organised crime in Britain. The old image of the British gangster as a lone operator running a domestic racket has given way to a far more complex picture. Today's gangsters are nodes in a vast international network. A deal struck in a cafe in Amsterdam or a safe house in Rotterdam can result in a kilo of cocaine flooding a town in Yorkshire or a batch of guns ending up on a Birmingham estate. The Mocro Mafia, in particular, represents this globalization of crime, and the UK has had to adapt accordingly. The story of the Mocro Mafia's operations in England is a cautionary tale of globalization's dark side. It shows how the underworld has no borders, and how a violent feud in Antwerp or Amsterdam can send ripples that hit London, Liverpool, or any other city. It's a story still unfolding, with law enforcement determined to write the final chapter. For now, the public remains largely unaware of much of this shadow conflict. They might catch snippets on the news, a dramatic raid here, a big seizure there, maybe a headline about an encrypted phone bust or a record cocaine haul. But beneath those headlines is an ongoing saga of cat and mouse, of move and counter-move. The Mocro Mafia in England is being squeezed, but it is far from vanquished. One thing is clear, the men and women of the NCA, the regional police units and their European counterparts are pushing back hard, and they're learning more every day about their adversaries. With each arrest, each trial, more of the mystery is stripped away. The names, the methods, the finances. It's a slow, grinding effort, but it is paying dividends. And as those officers carry on with their serious, methodical, and often dangerous work, they carry the hope that they can prevent the kind of bloody narcotics war that the Netherlands has endured from ever fully taking hold on British soil. In the end, the battle against the Mocro Mafia in England is about preserving safety and order, ensuring that English ports don't become free-for-all drug conduits, that city streets don't echo with the gunfire of hired assassins, and that children aren't left scarred and traumatized by merciless drug barons. It's a battle fought in boardrooms and back alleys, on the open seas and in courtrooms with high-security docks. It's the story of a ruthless criminal network and the equally relentless pursuit by those sworn to stop it. And as this real-life crime thriller continues to play out, England's authorities are resolute. They will not allow their country to become the next narco-state, and they will go to great lengths to ensure that the gripping saga of the Mocro Mafia in the UK ends with the perpetrators behind bars and the rule of law prevailing.